If you're not using Claude Code this year, no matter what your role is, you're probably underperforming. That's Geoff Charles, CPO at Ramp. Ramp shipped over 500 features last year and hit over $1 billion in revenue with around 25 PMs, and he credits a big chunk of that to AI agents running the workflow end to end. Welcome to X-Pulse Digest. Geoff talked with Peter Yang on the Peter Yang podcast about what it looks like when the spec stops being a document and starts being an input to a machine that can ship. The most useful mental model Geoff drops is almost offensively simple. The spec isn't the product plan anymore. The spec is basically the output of a prompt, and the product is the output of the spec. So the loop becomes prompt to product, back to prompt, back to product. PMs used to pride themselves on the perfect spec, partly because engineers were the bottleneck and you wanted to reduce rework. At Ramp, Geoff's framing is that AI is reading the spec now, not the engineer, and AI will read it thoroughly, reread it, and then actually build something. So writing changes. You're not writing for persuasion or for alignment theater or for a future reader who's already booked in meetings. You're writing instructions for an agent that's going to do work. That pulls PMs and other roles closer to building because the cost of code drops toward tokens plus review, and the bottleneck becomes your taste, your clarity, and how fast you can iterate on a real artifact. And that's where Ramp gets aggressive. Geoff says about 50% of Ramp's code is built by AI, up from 30% in December, and he expects 80% by March. He's careful to call it an estimate, but the direction is the point. If that sounds risky, the natural question is how they decide what to build before they crank the handle. The answer starts with an agent that lives in their customer conversations. Ramp has 50,000 plus customers, and a lot of humans touching the customer through sales, support, and account management. That creates signal, but it also creates noise. Geoff says the first major AI investment was what they call voice of the customer. Now it's an agent that can sift through Gong recordings, Salesforce notes, in-app surveys, support tickets, in-app chats, and analytics. The vibe isn't generate a summary, it's answer whatever question a PM has about a persona, a workflow, a pain point, and gaps in the product, with sources. In the demo, Geoff asks for feedback on their procurement product, chooses a window of 90 days, and limits it to support tickets and chat logs. The bot comes back with key topics and links to the underlying assets, like purchase order management, approval flow routing, exports, and currency constraints. He says it took about 8 minutes. The real unlock is that this isn't a one-shot dashboard. It's a conversation with an analyst that never gets tired. You can prompt deeper, ask for customer quotes, get customer IDs to research, and even draft an email you can send to book meetings. The interface is basically Slack, which is a quiet but important design decision. Once you can interrogate qualitative feedback like that, the next trap is quantitative data. Most companies still make data-driven mean file a ticket and wait. Ramp tried that, then moved past it into something more operational. Ramp launched an internal bot for data analysis called Ramp Research. Instead of wrestling with Looker, you just ask the question and get the answer. Geoff gives an example, like, what's the open rate of automated emails customers sent? And the system understands their database, the schemas, and returns an interpreted result quickly. By making it easier to ask data questions, you increase the number of people who ask them. Then he says that version is already outdated. They moved to Snowflake CLI plus Claude plus skills. In their setup, a skill is a reusable, opinionated way to do a task. This is the part that feels like a shift in how you think. Geoff says you don't really have a question, you have a goal. Tell AI the goal, and you'll be surprised by the questions it asks itself to get you there. So the request becomes something like, build me a full report on procurement performance, identify the top blockers in our funnel, and draft 10 growth ideas. And Claude can generate a full HTML report that's fully baked into our data and directly actionable. Okay, but insight is still not product. Ramp's reputation here comes from shipping. That's where their internal build tool shows up, and it's the part that makes people either excited or a little nauseous. Geoff says the question becomes how to make it easy for a non-builder to engage with code, because code can be intimidating even when it's cheap. Ramp invested in building a visual layer on top of large language models called Inspect, designed to accelerate builders and even let PMs ship. The demo prompt is simple. Build a report on top of a bills table with 4 metrics. What's overdue, what's upcoming, buckets like 0 to 30 days and 30 to 90 days, plus total outstanding. Inspect plans the work, understands the codebase, knows where to make changes, and has access to Ramp's design component library. It reuses their existing components and patterns so the output looks like the product. Geoff shows the working result, a metrics layer on top of the bills table. He says it took 5 minutes. Peter pushes on the obvious skepticism. Is this just a front-end prototype? Geoff's answer is, no, it's the real product, back-end and front-end. Then he says the quiet, wild part. After Inspect generates the changes, you get a pull request you can submit to the engineering team. They also have automated PR review processes, and Geoff says a double-digit percentage of PRs are automatically approved. And once you have that, the question becomes less, can we build, and more, how do we keep coherence when everyone can ship? Ramp's answer is a mix of routing, rollout discipline, and something like release automation as a product. If everyone can create PRs all day, how do you keep quality high and the product cohesive? They use Inspect's understanding of complexity to decide how review should work. More complex changes get routed to the right person, depending on whether it's a bigger product change or more engineering heavy. He says they pair it with a robust release process. The rollout approach is familiar, but they operationalize it. Dog fooding as alpha, then a beta tier that about 10% of customers opt into, then GA based on analytics and a review process for material features. Where it gets distinct is the automation around release management. They have another bot, Ramp Releases, that creates a release report by pulling context, a preview of the product, and impact from Snowflake. Help Center articles get written automatically. Internal enablement gets written automatically. Slack posts get drafted. This shifts what leadership review means. Peter asks if the review is still about a document. Geoff's answer is that the role changes. Now there's a super intelligent platform you can leverage, so the higher leverage job is finding what broke in the process. If a user experience is bad, the fix isn't just telling someone to move a button. Geoff gives a specific example. He'd told the team over and over that the call to action needs to be above the fold. Instead of repeating himself for the 100th time, that rule becomes part of the automated design creation process, so it's baked into prototypes before it reaches him. My job is to automate my job, he says. That mindset bleeds into planning, too, where most companies still burn months pretending they can see the future. When Peter asks about annual planning and 3-year roadmaps, Geoff's answer is blunt. 3 months. Not because they don't care about strategy, but because prediction is collapsing under how fast the tools change. Geoff says planning has 3 objectives. First, align on strategy, which is mostly about trade-offs. What problems you're focused on, what problems you're not focused on, and which customer segments you're going after. Second, create commitment and accountability for teams. Third, give sales a baseline view of what's coming so they can talk to customers credibly. Even that third pillar gets automated. Once teams have their backlog and plan in Notion, an automatic process creates one-pagers, then slides and sales content inside their branding guidelines. Which brings us to the career anxiety sitting under the whole episode. If agents can code, and agents can write, and agents can analyze, what happens to PMs? Geoff doesn't do doom, but he also doesn't offer comfort. The PM role, in his view, splits in two directions. One path is becoming a builder. If code is free, the craft shifts from writing specs to living in the product, iterating fast, and turning taste and vision into something real. Specs matter, but mostly as instructions to agents. The other path is the business side, a GM mindset. Engineers and designers can build great products, especially when they're amplified by agents. What they often lack is context about how the business wins long-term, how to position, distribute, monetize, and drive enterprise value. Geoff's argument is that product leaders should increasingly own that strategy. He's also pretty harsh about how PMs have been trained. Stakeholder management, prioritization frameworks, communication rituals. With agents, those can become outdated forms of work, especially if they're just a way to feel safe. The biggest danger he sees is high-performing people who don't change because the old way made them successful. There's a cultural design behind this at Ramp. No committees, no endless sign-offs. Prove you've added value, then go run. They also track AI usage across the company and treat proficiency as a hiring requirement. And when Peter asks how you stay employable, Geoff's advice is pointed. Don't optimize for management right now. Become the best builder you can. Get embedded in the tools. Carve out time to learn, even if it means fewer meetings. The line that lingers is about what software becomes. Geoff thinks B2B products start to look less like tables and workflows and more like coworkers. If you haven't used coworkers in your own job, you won't recognize what your product should be. If you want the full texture of how Ramp actually runs this machine, Geoff Charles' full conversation with Peter Yang on the Peter Yang podcast is worth your time. The uncomfortable question it leaves you with is simple. If your job is to automate your job, what did you automate this week?